The next gentleman that's scheduled to speak here, I know him, and you should probably know him too if you listen to the sUAS News podcast, as he is my trusty sidekick and co-host, Mr. Gene Robinson. I've also got a signed copy of his book out there, the First to Deploy, which we will be giving away this afternoon, but I'd like you to welcome Mr. Gene Robinson.
Okay, I'm amazed at how much there is to learn at this expo. One of the things is don't be one of the last presenters because everybody used to use your stuff. So, with that said, any questions? No, I'm just kidding. It does allow me to kind of touch on some of the things that some folks have already said that I think are very important. As you may or may not know, we are involved heavily with the use of unmanned aircraft and search and rescue and have been for a number of years. And a little history on us is that we do have a registered 501c3. We are a nonprofit, which between my for-profit and my nonprofit, there's not much difference. But we are wholly owned by RP Flight Systems, who is the developer of the Flying Spectre, the Flying Wheel Spectre. And the counselor there just, kind of relieved my fears of what happens when somebody comes after the manufacturer. So on the user and the manufacturer, it's easy for the suit. But the most important thing that we tried to do in the beginning, back in the turn of the century, which makes me sound kind of old when I say turn of the century, but back in 2003, 2004, when we came up with this airframe and started working with the flying wing, was how do you get folks to accept what you're doing out there with it? As a manufacturer, is that an obstacle to market? And sure it was, because unmanned aircraft back in 2001, 2002 were kind of voodoo at that point. Nobody really knew what they were. It wasn't in the public perception. And here we are, we come out of this flying wing that is all kind of sleek and stealthy looking and all that good stuff, and people go, ooh, this is really cool. But what can it do to really help the situation, and what can you do? So, our business plan was developed with no DOD income stream. Imagine that. It was all civilian based. We knew that the civilian market way back then was going to be huge and it was going to be coming soon. And we decided to target first responders, law enforcement, and fire. And to that end, we began to develop our own set of procedures. We use the RCAPA standards for our community-based standards for civilian applications. You had to have SOPs, you had to have risk mitigation plans, and this was all before we even had our first talk with the FAA. So as we pushed through each one of these applications that you see for forestry, wildland control, disaster, and ultimately search and recovery, we developed a pretty comprehensive set of procedures. And that's what we moved forward out of the market with. So in 2005, we made our first recovery in 2005 using unmanned aircraft. And one of the things that we did to mitigate the risk was to reduce the size of the aircraft. And at the time, it was called a Tier 1, which is a 2 kilogram class of aircraft. So, and it was foam, and it was plastic, and it had densities that were below the minimum requirements that were set up by MIT for impact on windshields and all that stuff. So we felt that we had mitigated a significant amount of risk with taking this thing out into the public venue. With our first recovery, which, by the way, used manned assets, many ground searchers, and they covered the area with a fine-tooth comb. We went out there and took over 200 images, and our first mistake was we handed the images over to the incident command and said, there you are, look at it and see if it's planning. Well, our victim was recovered, and when we went through our post-process of looking at the situation, we discovered that the victim was in 14 of those 200 pictures that we took. That changed our business plan again. So it's not just that you go out and fly and you can address issues like this on a public, for unmanned aircraft situations like this, but you need to know what to do with the data afterwards. So we began developing methods to deal with EO, IR, and the data that we could gather. And we went from calling them aerial platforms, aerial photography platforms, and called them aerial data collection systems. Because we didn't really care whether to carry a camera or a sniffer or some other sensor that could be collecting data for a given situation. But you still had to do something with that at the end, so we started addressing that. I'm going to bring up a little bit of history. In 2006, I was asked, in 2006 we had 2 recoveries by the time. I was asked to present at the Department of Homeland Security, and we set up a booth, and we were the only civilian, well, no, we were the only unmanned aircraft at that particular conference. And at the end of 3 days, I had a stack of cards this tall with agencies, multiple agencies, telling me contact our purchasing department, we're going to buy one. That was in December of 2006. And of course, we know what happened with the great clarification of February 13, 2007. That whole stack of cards went away because they said, we're going to wait until the FAA is cleared out. Now, we have a long and storied history with the FAA. There are many folks up in UAIO that I'm on first-name basis with. And we may not be the most well-liked, but we have been doing more flying in SAS safely over the last 9 years than anybody that we know of. And it has been a part of the education process that we have been trying to move forward with and showing law enforcement, first responders, how a UA can be used in a given situation. And we chose as one of the most important for us is search and rescue, because if you'll notice, many of the polls that have come out these days on acceptable use of unmanned aircraft, 80 to 90% of folks polled think that search and rescue is an acceptable use. We have never been deprived or asked to leave by a private citizen when we are on search, ever, in the 9 years that we've been doing it. Take that back. One time we were asked not to fly a piece of property, and that individual ended up being the perpetrator of a homicide, and that's why he didn't want to fly. So, that kind of is a key there. And we end up collecting these sorts of profiles on missions that we completed. And we have a huge database, as you can well imagine, because we have flown thousands of missions. If you've heard about it on the news, if you've heard about a missing person on the news, chances are we were there flying. Kaylee Anthony, Natalie Holloway, Chelsea King, Sarah Parker. We have flown in 29 states and 4 countries. Safely. No one has been hurt. No property has been damaged. We've had an aircraft or 2 that we've had to ditch to mitigate risks, but there has been no safety issues with our operations since we have started this back in 2005. Now, as we collect our data, again, we're moving back to the data situation, we've discovered that the sensors have changed significantly. As Gus discussed, and everybody that has talked about carrying a sensor, the ability of a small aircraft like 4-pound flying wing to carry smaller and smaller sensors has increased dramatically. Moore's Law is in effect. We're going. I remember when we flew our first little VGA camera and knew then that it was going to be something big. Now we're flying EO, IR, 16 megapixels, 20 megapixels, and up. And it increases the resolution of what we can see on the ground. And again, manned assets. We have come in right behind manned assets, and they've said, yep, covered it with fine-tooth comb, had 2 observers in the copter, didn't see a thing. And we come back and we fly and say, excuse me, did you miss something? This individual had been missing for 6 months. We found him in less than 22 hours. And that was spending the night at a hotel. As you zoom in on these pictures, and I don't mean to be macabre about these, this family has agreed to let me use the images of their loved one to demonstrate just exactly what we can do. And what we've done as we analyze pictures, we wanted to find what doesn't belong. And in this particular instance, those 2 white specks down there just happen to be the individual's tennis shoes. And that's what leads us into the data analysis for search and rescue and the procedures to do it with. Another example of this one is that you would think that that's just a muddy chunk of water. Well, this was the very first flight, or the very first image of the very first flight that we did just outside of Houston and Buffalo Bay. It was in the ship channel. And I don't know if you can see it, but in the upper right-hand corner, this individual was neutrally buoyant, just below the surface of the water, and we detected him. And they had been looking for him for 2 days, and it took us exactly 15 minutes to find him. That's not going to show up, but trust me, he's in there. Our ground zero was, again, and then this is our ground zero. This is the first image that we collected when we started flying, search and recovery, search and rescue in Hayes County. And this lady went missing, and she'd been missing for 5 days. And we knew that there was some technology out there that could help us do that, and we began studying macrobiology software. And we sent it off to a company. This image has heart victim in it, and we asked them to process it, and sure enough, they looked for anything that was blue in that picture. And they pulled up that, and it was only 14 megapixels out of 20 that could be seen, and she was picked up. So that sort of advance is continuing. And we're looking forward to using more of that. Now, okay, everybody's going to want to know, well, how have you been doing this in mass? I'm sure the FAA has felt like they've been playing whack-a-mole with me, because I've tried to do just about everything I could to comply. During the great clarification, we were in discussions with Doug Davis and folks at the UAPO at the time on how we could comply. And Patrick was in on that, and that's how he ended up being involved in the first ARC. So we began developing those procedures that potentially the FAA would accept as being able to go out and fly these in mass. And one of the things that was landed on at the time was that if you're in the 2 kilogram category, it was to be lightly regulated. I'm sure Ted remembers that well. And we built our procedures and our aircraft around that. Well, that went by the wayside, and then it became an issue of being a commercial operation or not, hence 501c3, the nonprofit. It is by IRS definition non-commercial. So we went out into the world as a nonprofit organization and continued to do what we did, which was significant. Thousands of missions under that nonprofit. Not being paid, taking donations, or it was out of their pockets. And it was really to continue the education process, to let people know what you can do with an unmanned aircraft, a small unmanned aircraft. And we could potentially make it smaller, but 2 kilograms is pretty light for an aircraft like that. So as we continue down that education path, again, in our effort to comply, we wrote a COA request for our county. And we were awarded one of the first COAs that was awarded to a civilian government in the U.S. in 2008. So again, we draw on that skill, that knowledge, and that process to build our procedures and to apply them to civilian processes. Now, one of the things that we wanted to do was disaster mitigation. To that end, I don't know if anybody's heard about it, but the National Incident Management System, NIMS, has their own set of protocols. And if you have a fire, large-scale disaster, or anything like that, NIMS protocols are in effect. You may not know it. It's kind of a transparent thing that allows many different agencies to work together. And it's a very good system. NIMS protocols also calls for air asset control. That is typically in the areas of fire suppression and tankers and helicopters and that sort of thing. But under those conditions, they fly under a TFR, temporary flight restriction. And what that does is that blocks off an area of the airspace, and there is one person who is taking responsibility for that, and that is the air boss in the incident command system that is controlled by the National Incident Management System protocols. And that's where we targeted a lot of our operations. Because essentially what that does is it tells the FAA, okay, you're not responsible anymore. And that's really what they want. If you're out there flying, they don't want to be responsible for what you do when you're out there flying. So from that time forward, we have started flying in a TFR whenever possible. Because any agency can call for a TFR if they feel like the public need is best served by that. So, Gene, how did you do it? That's the way we went as far as getting out into the NAS and doing the many missions that we have done. And it was mentioned by one of the other presenters, play where you're welcome. And let me tell you what, search and rescue, we have been welcome everywhere. There is no agency has turned down our help. We have flown for the Texas Rangers, for the New York Police, California Highway Patrol. You name it, we've flown for them. We've flown for many three-letter agencies, and they will be happy to take whatever technology you can bring and help them solve a case, prevent a crime, do whatever is necessary to help them perform their job. Now, we've taken a step back even further, that if we say fire and search and rescue, and you leave the law enforcement and the privacy issue over here, because we all know that privacy issues become a very hot topic. So if you do that, I kind of heard an analogy that I thought was pretty good, is when the big red and white LaFrance, American LaFrance fire engine comes down the street, everybody comes out of the house and runs to the curb and watches it go by. But when the black and white comes down the street, you'll see a lot of people turn around and curb right back in the house. Because when the police come, they may not want to be involved. So with that, we have always played where we were welcome. And that has served us extremely well. One of the things that we think helps us as well is, as Ted has mentioned before, anytime you go for experimental and that sort of thing, it's good to have a lot of data to back it up. Well, we obviously have a lot of data, documented data, on flights that we have performed. And there are no theoretical assumptions in what we've done. There's no theory at all. We've gone out, we've flown, we've learned. We've had to determine what works in the field and what doesn't. We've flown 400 AGL, we've flown higher, we've flown VLOS, visual line of sight. we've accidentally flown P-loss. We don't like to do that, but it has happened, but we've recovered. And all that's documented, and all that's available. So it's something that we have attempted to give to the community, and that's the part of the process that we're going through even today. Is that we want you folks out there to benefit from what we've done in the field. We learned the hard way. We've had to change processes, we've changed procedures. But we've done it and we've succeeded. And we want the rest of the community to succeed with us as we go about that. So, with that, I'm going to wrap it up and see if there's any questions.
So, this seems like incredibly important work that you're doing. Maybe this is the most important work that any of us could be doing here.
Thank you.
Have you given thought to how you scale out what you're doing nationally, and how do people like us help out? How do the thousands and tens of thousands of people out there doing this get involved?
Yes, we have thought about it. We certainly encourage anyone to perform community service as they can, in any way they can. But we as a technology have a very special gift that we can offer our communities. And it may be just as small as taking a few pictures to help your local sheriff or your local search team or your local fire department. And trust me, I've learned that post-fire is just as important as while the fire is burning. So, yes, encourage you to get in touch with your local law enforcement officials. Do what is necessary to become compliant. You know, regulation is coming. Model yourself after what is already in place. We took our code and took those specifications that they call for, and we've incorporated them into our day-to-day operations. Do the same. I mean, that's what they're used to seeing. So give them what they're used to seeing. Anyone else?
So I take it from your description that you're not using any form of autopilot or FPV system.
Didn't say that.
Okay, so if you're willing to discuss just real briefly what kinds of guidance systems you use, and presumably you're covering, you know, the utility of what you're doing is obviously probably covering fairly large areas with fairly detailed imagery, and I would imagine that there's a certain amount of automation that would enable that, or at least, you know, the ability to fly longer ranges than you can do line of sight. So what kinds of systems, and is that part of the COA that you were granted, and how is that working for you?
Well, the COA typically covers an automated system, but that is not necessary for doing search and recovery. As a matter of fact, a simple RC system is quite effective in search and rescue, search and recovery. We typically use a stabilized system of some sort, simply because it's easier to control, takes the workload off of the pilot. If you do have a system that will do navigation for you, it's easier to do a grid pattern. However, when you consider that you can fly a line of sight easily out to quarter mile, half mile, which gives you a square mile that you can easily cover, and you can image very quickly. 10, 15 minutes, your footprint can be very, very small. So you can fly that square mile, get down, get images analyzed, and move on to the next square mile. And there is very much a science to search and rescue. And it's very incremental, and it's very serial. So you go along with it and cover those areas that need to be covered. And I can't stress enough is that the unmanned aircraft can go in areas where you don't want to send people. Alligators, swamps, water. You can't get those people out there without risking another crisis by having to go rescue one of your foot searchers. That's where the unmanned aircraft shines. And that's the kind of thing that we use to to comply. If we can go out under RC and fly it under RC, then that profile is more comfortable to the FAA if we're not receiving compensation for it. I've learned a lot of new terms. I'm going to practice my art now and do a lot of proof of concept demos when they're doing that because I'm testing sensors or whatever. But, I mean, that's what you want to try to do. You want to try to comply as much as you can. And an RC profile is a way to do that. If you're out flying around and you happen to be in the area, which that was brought up in a case that we were on in Ohio, and that I was asked to stand down. And there was some congressional involvement on that, and they made the observation that I could be out flying an aircraft on my own and take pictures on my own, and if I happened to discover the person or the people that we were looking for, I could give that to the IC, and that would be fine. But since they brought me out and they asked me to go fly, and I flew for them, that is in an official basis or official capacity, that's not acceptable. Okay. Yes, sir.
So you and Ted keep ringing the bell on the idea of supporting your applications to the FAA with data and also in sort of conforming to what the FAA has said that's what we like, that's what it looks like. Are you willing to be very transparent and sort of sharing what you've done over these so many years establishing the pattern of the FAA? I'm asking because I'm consulting a municipal fire department right now, right in Chicago. And a lot of the things that you've done are some of the missing pieces in our application. And I just think that to this gentleman's question, just sitting here, it occurs to me that there's a real opportunity there to potentially have a sort of open, transparent repository for the data, for the template, for the application, so that we can replicate this across as many public service oriented applications in the country as possible, just for the good of civilization.
Agreed. And there are actually two facets to your question. One is the data. When Patrick and I were working with the RCAPA, Remote Control Air Photography Association, I was a software geek in a previous life, and I wrote an application that was a logbook, and we offered it to the RCAPA membership for free, where they could log all their flights, and it would be sent anonymously to the website, to URL. We offered that to the FAA as data for, and we were going to give it to them all, crashes, unscheduled landing, whatever you want to call them, failures, and we had hoped that would start the 10 to the 9th process that needed to get going, and it was refused. Don't know the politics behind it, what was going on. They said they couldn't validate it, this, that, and the other thing. And we've been attempting to get data, collect data like that since we've started this. So yes, transparency is absolutely a must. And it is even more so in this day and age of privacy. If you can tell the entire population of wherever you're going to fly that you're going to fly, come out and look, that's even better. Because they will get more comfortable with that as they go. But the other data facet that you talked about was being able to fill out the code properly. I think Dr. Lemieux talked about it, and being able to do that. And it is an extensive process. I've written 5 so far. And you do have to jump through a bunch of hoops to get it done and to get what they want to hear in there. That's the most important thing. Because while they do say that the COA process takes 60 days, our first group took 10 months. Some of them take longer. And they say if the clock starts, when they get it, and then it stops when they send it back to you. Well, they send it back to you quite a bit if you don't have the correct data in. So that's what stretches the time. Yes, sir.
Are you able to offer support to companies, sUAS, operating companies outside of the US?
Yes, we've been in 4 other countries. We've done search and rescue, and we've provided data analysis support to other countries as well. Anybody else? Thank you very much for your time.
get carried away.
Like this happens,
Thank you.